Roughly 160,000 described moth species worldwide. Roughly 17,500 described butterfly species. Both belong to the same order, Lepidoptera. Moths make up about 90% of that order. Butterflies, the remaining 10. In the United Kingdom, one of the most thoroughly surveyed patches of land on Earth, there are around 2,500 recorded moth species. Butterflies in the same country, 59. 2,500 versus 59. Sit with that ratio for a moment, because it should feel wrong. You have almost certainly, at some point in your life, been handed a pamphlet, or watched a segment, or read a headline about saving the butterflies. You have probably never once been asked to save the moths. And yet, species for species, in the country that produced Darwin and half the founding literature of modern ecology, moths outnumber butterflies more than 40 to 1. This is not a fringe group. This is the group. Butterflies are the exception. Moths are the rule. And somewhere along the way, we built an entire cultural conversation about pollinators that ignored the overwhelming majority of the animals doing the work. Ask yourself honestly, when was the last time a moth made you stop and look? Now ask when a butterfly last did. The difference isn't the animal. The difference is us. Push into the diversity itself and the numbers get stranger. The Atlas moth of Southeast Asia has a wingspan of around 27 centimeters, larger than a human hand fully spread. The white witch moth of Central and South America reaches wingspans of nearly 30 centimeters tip to tip. At the other extreme, micromoths in the family Nepticulidae have wingspans under 3 millimeters. 3 millimeters, smaller than a grain of rice. Between those extremes sit the hawk-moths, hovering like hummingbirds. The geometers, thin as paper. The tiger moths, banded in warning colors, as loud as any butterfly. The underwings, drab on top and shocking red or yellow beneath. There are moths that mimic wasps, moths that mimic bird droppings, moths that don't eat as adults because their entire adult life lasts a week and their mouths have vanished. This is not a monotonous group of grey things around your porch light. This is a radiation of forms so vast that entomologists have spent 2 centuries describing it, and are still describing it. New moth species are named every single year, in numbers that dwarf almost every other insect group being catalogued. Estimates vary, but researchers routinely suggest the true global figure could be closer to 500,000 species once undescribed tropical fauna are counted. 500,000. And we have named roughly a third of them. So why don't you know this? Why isn't this common knowledge? Because our idea of a pollinator was built in daylight. You eat lunch when bees are working. You take a walk when butterflies are flying. Your garden magazine features flowers photographed at noon. Every wildlife documentary about pollination, almost without exception, is shot in bright sun. The animals we credit with pollinating the world are the animals we happen to be awake to watch. Everything else, the vast majority of insect life on this planet, which is nocturnal, got quietly written out of the story. Not because it wasn't there, because we weren't. And then there's the second cultural problem. The word moth itself. Say butterfly, and people picture a garden. Say moth, and people picture a hole in a sweater, or a swarm around a bulb, or a pest on stored grain. The English language has, over centuries, loaded the word with associations of decay, damage, and nuisance. A tiny handful of moth species, clothes moths in the family Ctenidae, a few stored product species, created an entire reputation for a group of 160,000. Imagine judging every mammal on Earth by the behavior of the house rat. That is roughly what we have done to moths. The result is a conservation blind spot, the size of the group itself. Which brings us to the research imbalance. And this one is genuinely difficult to talk about without getting angry. Estimates vary, but reviews of pollination science over the last few decades consistently find that studies focused on bees outnumber studies focused on moths by something on the order of 30 or 40 to 1. Some analyses put the gap wider. Funding follows the same pattern. Public awareness campaigns follow the same pattern. Agricultural policy follows the same pattern. In the United States and the European Union, pollinator protection frameworks, the ones with legal teeth, the ones that actually change what a farmer can spray and when, were built almost entirely around managed honeybees and, more recently, a handful of wild bee species. Moths, in most of these frameworks, are not named at all. They are not a protected category. They are not a monitored category. In many countries, they are not even a counted category, outside of volunteer citizen science efforts. Think about what that means. We have constructed a global system for protecting pollinators that, by design, cannot see the majority of pollinators. It protects what it studies what it funds what the public asks about, and the public has been asking about bees because the public was told to ask about bees. The loop closes on itself, and the moths fall out of it entirely. This is not an accident of science. It is a choice. A cascade of small choices, made over decades, about which animals mattered enough to name in a policy document. And every one of those choices was made in the absence of the data we now have. Data showing that moths are not a footnote to pollination. They are a pillar of it. Here's the uncomfortable part. The tools to fix this exist. Light traps are cheap. Genetic barcoding of pollen is now routine. Volunteer moth recording networks in the UK have generated one of the richest ecological datasets of any animal group on the planet, and they did it on evenings and weekends, funded by almost nothing. The knowledge is there. What's missing is the will to act on it. What's missing is the political and cultural weight that bees have and moths don't. And that weight is missing for one reason and one reason only. Nobody made moths into a symbol. Nobody printed them on a tote bag. Nobody built a Save the Moths campaign that broke through. So look at your dinner plate. In 2023, a research team at the University of Sussex published something that should have made international headlines and didn't. They tracked pollinator visits to flowers in 10 sites across southern England, day and night, using time-lapse cameras and pollen analysis. The finding was blunt. Moths, working entirely in darkness, were responsible for around a third of all pollen transport in the surveyed plant communities. In some habitats, bramble patches, hedgerow edges, nocturnal moth activity accounted for more pollen movement than every daytime insect combined. Bees included, hoverflies included, butterflies included, 1/3. From the group nobody funds. And this wasn't a fluke of one English summer. Similar studies in Portugal, in the United States, in the tropics of Costa Rica, have found the same signal. A 2020 study in Agricultural Landscapes tracked pollen loads on individual moths and found that settling moths, the plain, brownish ones you would never look twice at, were carrying pollen from dozens of plant species per individual, on their legs, their tongues, the scales of their thoraxes. They were moving genetic material across landscapes at a scale nobody had bothered to measure until someone finally pointed a camera at the dark. Think about what that means for the food you eat. Think about what it means for the wildflowers along every road you drive. A third of the pollination in a temperate ecosystem was happening on a shift we did not know existed, performed by animals we did not fund, in a language of scent and moonlight we still barely understand. That is not a supplementary workforce. That is half the operation. Now push into the specifics, because the specifics are where the co-evolution gets genuinely beautiful. Papaya flowers open at dusk and release their scent at night. Their primary pollinators, across their native range, are hawk-moths. Certain tobacco species, the wild ones, not the crop, are pollinated almost exclusively by nocturnal moths, drawn to a specific chemical signature the plant only emits after sunset. Yucca plants across the American Southwest depend on yucca moths so tightly that neither organism can reproduce without the other. The moth actively pollinates the flower and lays its eggs in the ovary, and if the moth vanishes, the plant vanishes with it. This is not a loose ecological association. This is a contract signed in evolutionary time, written into the genome of both partners. And then, there is Darwin's orchid. In 1862, Charles Darwin was sent a specimen of a Madagascan orchid called Angraecum sesquipedale. Its nectar spur, the tube leading to its nectar reward, was almost 30 centimeters long. Darwin looked at it and made a prediction that got him laughed at for the rest of his life. "Somewhere in Madagascar," he wrote, "there must exist a moth with a tongue long enough to reach the bottom of that spur." He never saw it. He died without ever seeing it. 41 years after his prediction, in 1903, entomologists formally described Xanthopan morganii predictor, the predicted one, a hawk moth with a proboscis over 25 centimeters long, coiled beneath its head like a spring. Darwin was right. The moth existed. It had existed the whole time. Nobody had bothered to look. That story is usually told as a triumph of evolutionary reasoning, and it is. But look at it a second way. A plant and an animal spent millions of years shaping each other, tongue against tube, scent against sensor, until they became so tightly matched that neither could function without the other, and Western science did not know the animal existed until the 20th century. How many xanthopans are still out there, unnamed, doing work we haven't measured on plants we haven't studied? Estimates vary wildly, but tropical entomologists routinely suggest that the majority of nocturnal pollination partnerships on Earth have never been formally described. The majority. We are talking about a hidden layer of the biosphere that keeps rainforests functioning and that we have barely begun to inventory. And every year we lose habitat before we can catalogue what was in it. Every year the window closes a little more. Now the layer underneath. Because pollination is only half of what moths do, and arguably not even the more important half, moths spend most of their lives not as moths. They spend it as caterpillars. And caterpillars, in ecological terms, are essentially walking protein. In the United Kingdom, moth caterpillars form the overwhelming majority of the diet of nesting songbirds. A single brood of blue tits, one of the most common garden birds in Britain, requires an estimated 10,000 caterpillars to fledge. 10,000 for one nest, for one season. Multiply that across every blue tit territory in the country, then add great tits, chaffinches, warblers, wrens, cuckoos, nightjars, and you are looking at a caterpillar demand measured in hundreds of billions. Where does that biomass come from? Overwhelmingly, moths. Butterflies contribute a rounding error. It is moth caterpillars, the ones eating oak leaves, birch leaves, hawthorn leaves, grasses, mosses, that are converting plant tissue into the animal protein that feeds the next trophic level up. Now widen the frame. Bats. Almost every insectivorous bat species in the temperate world eats moths as a primary food source. In North America, studies of little brown bats have found moths making up over 60% of the diet by biomass in some seasons. Nightjars, those cryptic, wide-mouthed birds that hunt at dusk, are effectively specialized moth predators. Owls eat moth-eating rodents. Small mammals eat moth pupae from the leaf litter. Spiders build their web sized and placed for moth interception. The nocturnal food web of an entire temperate forest, from the invertebrates in the soil to the raptors at the top, is wired into moth abundance in ways ecologists are still mapping. And there is evidence, hard, published, peer-reviewed evidence, that the unraveling has begun. Populations of aerial insectivorous birds have collapsed across Europe and North America in parallel with insect declines. Spotted flycatchers in the United Kingdom are down by over 80% since the 1960s. Nightjar populations have contracted sharply across their European range. Cuckoo numbers in Britain have more than halved in a generation. Bat populations of moth specialist species are declining in regions where moth abundance is falling fastest, and the correlation is tight enough that ecologists have stopped treating it as coincidence and started treating it as cause. The collapse has a paper trail, and the paper trail begins in a field in Hertfordshire. Rothamsted Research, north of London, runs the longest-running standardized insect monitoring program on Earth. Since 1968, a network of light traps positioned across the United Kingdom has been catching, identifying, and counting moths every single night, in the same way, in the same places, using the same equipment. Not a survey, not a snapshot, a continuous, unbroken time series of nocturnal insect abundance stretching back more than half a century. There is nothing else like it in the world. And here is what the Rothamsted data says. The The total abundance of larger moths across Britain has fallen by around 33% since the survey began. In the southern half of the country, the warmer, more agricultural half, where most people live, the decline is closer to 40%. Some individual species have fallen by over 90%. The garden tiger moth, once one of the commonest large moths in Britain, a creature so familiar it appeared in children's books, is down by roughly 92%. The V-moth, down by around 99%. The orange upperwing, functionally extinct in the country. Read those figures again slowly. 92, 99, gone. This is not a computer model. This is not a projection. This is not somebody's alarmist estimate of what might happen if trends continue. This is what has already happened, measured trap by trap, night by night, by an institution that has been counting the same insects the same way for longer than most viewers of this video have been alive. When Rothamsted publishes a number, that number is as close to ground truth as ecology gets. And Rothamsted is not the only witness. In 2017, a group of German entomologists published a paper that hit the scientific community like a slap. The Krefeld study, named after the Amateur Entomological Society that had been collecting the data since the 1980s, reported that the total biomass of flying insects caught in Malaise traps across 63 nature reserves in Germany had fallen by 75% in 27 years. 75%. In protected areas. In places specifically set aside so that nature could carry on undisturbed. The Krefeld figure was so large that many scientists initially refused to believe it. It was independently reanalyzed. It held. Follow-up studies in the Netherlands, in Denmark, in Puerto Rico, in the Amazon, kept coming back with numbers in the same range. Declines of 50%, 60%, 80% in flying insect biomass over comparable time frames. And in every study that broke the biomass down by group, moths were overrepresented. They were falling faster than the average. They were falling harder than most other insects being measured alongside them. Two countries, two completely different methodologies. Rothamsted counted individual moths under standardized light traps. Krefeld weighed the total catch from passive interception nets. One approach isolates a single taxonomic group. The other captures everything that flies. And they landed on the same signal. A signal so consistent across so many independent datasets that the debate among ecologists is no longer whether the decline is real. That debate ended years ago. The debate now is only about how fast, how deep, and how much of it is still reversible. Sit with that. When two entirely different scientific methods, run by different people in different countries with different equipment across different decades, produce the same finding, that finding is not a statistical artifact. That finding is the world. And that shifts the question from, is this happening, to, what is doing this? The answer, when the drivers are laid out honestly, is not one thing. It is a stack, and every item in the stack is human. Start with pesticides. Neonicotinoid insecticides, the family of chemicals introduced in the 1990s and marketed as a safer alternative to older sprays, turned out to be catastrophically effective at killing non-target insects. They are systemic, meaning the plant absorbs them and expresses them in every tissue, including pollen and nectar. They persist in soil for months, sometimes years. They wash into waterways. A single treated seed can contain enough neonicotinoid to kill tens of thousands of insects that never touched the crop it was planted for. The European Union restricted the three main neonicotinoids for outdoor use in 2018 after mounting evidence of harm to pollinators. But restrictions vary globally, enforcement varies, and successor chemicals with similar profiles continue to be approved. Moth caterpillars, which chew treated plant tissue directly, absorb doses that adult flying insects never encounter. Now add habitat loss. In the United Kingdom, an estimated 97% of species-rich lowland meadow, the habitat type that supports the highest diversity of moths, has been destroyed since the 1930s. 97%. What remains exists in scattered fragments, most of them too small to sustain viable populations of the more specialized species. Hedgerows, another critical moth habitat, were ripped out at a rate of thousands of miles per year during the post-war agricultural intensification. In Germany, in France, in the American Midwest, in the Brazilian Cerrado, in the Chinese lowlands, the same story, in different accents. The living landscape has been converted into a production landscape, and the production landscape does not support moths. Now add monoculture itself. A field of wheat, of maize, of oilseed rape stretching to the horizon is not a habitat, it is a green desert. Moths need a diverse plant community, different species for different caterpillars, different flowering times to sustain adults through the season, structural variety for shelter and pupation. A single crop field, sprayed and cut on a schedule, provides none of that. Modern agriculture, at the scale we have built it, is fundamentally incompatible with the plant diversity moths evolved to depend on. This is not a claim about individual farmers. It is a claim about a system. Now add climate change. Warming shifts the timing of everything. When plants flower, when caterpillars hatch, when adults fly. Long-established phenological relationships, tuned over evolutionary time, are being pulled out of alignment within a single human generation. Moths that emerge before their food plants are available starve. Moths that emerge after their predators have already peaked survive in unusually high numbers, only to crash the following year. Populations that used to fluctuate around a stable average now oscillate wildly, and each oscillation risks a local extinction the population cannot recover from. And now, add nitrogen deposition. Fertilizers applied to fields drift as ammonia into the surrounding countryside, enriching the soil in habitats that evolved on poor soils. Enriched soils favor a small number of aggressive plant species, nettles, coarse grasses, that outcompete the specialized plants moth caterpillars depend on. Entire habitat types are being biochemically overwritten from downwind, silently, invisibly, in ways that do not show up on any satellite image, but that show up in the moth traps. Walk outside tonight in almost any town on Earth and look up. What you will see, or rather, what you will not see, is the sky moths evolved under. In 2023, a team led by the physicist Christopher Kaiba published a study in the journal Science that quantified something astronomers had been muttering about for years. Using observations from citizen scientists in more than 150 countries, the study found that the brightness of the night sky is increasing by approximately 9.6% per year. Not per decade, per year. At that rate, a child born tonight in a place with 200 visible stars will, by the time they are 18, be living under a sky with fewer than 100. The Milky Way, visible to every human being who ever lived before roughly 1950, is now invisible to around 80% of the world's population, and to 99% of people in the United States and Europe. This is not pollution in the way we usually mean the word. Nothing is being spilled, nothing is being burned, nothing is being dumped into a river, and yet a fundamental condition of terrestrial life, the alternation of day and night that every animal on the planet has been calibrated to for hundreds of millions of years, is being erased in a single human lifetime. Erased for convenience, erased for security lighting nobody asked for, erased for advertising nobody reads at 3 in the morning, erased in most cases by fixtures that could be replaced or angled or dimmed at almost no cost, and are not because nobody is required to. This is the fastest growing threat to moths on Earth, and it is the one nobody is fighting because nobody thinks of light as harm. The mechanism is not mysterious. Moths navigate by celestial cues: the moon, the horizon glow, the polarized light of the pre-dawn sky. When a bright artificial source enters that navigational field, the moth's flight algorithm breaks. The insect does not, contrary to the old story, fly into the light because it wants to. It flies into the light because its internal compass is now pointing at a street lamp. It orbits, it exhausts itself, it becomes easy prey for bats and spiders that have learned to hunt the lit zones. Or it simply hangs there, motionless, until dawn, having lost the entire night in which it should have been feeding, mating, or pollinating. In 2021, A study in the journal Nature reported that pollination visits by nocturnal insects to flowers under artificial streetlights fell by 62% compared to unlit control sites nearby. 62%. In a single generation of experimental design, researchers demonstrated that a functioning ecosystem service can be shut off by installing a lamp. Follow-up work has shown reduced caterpillar development under artificial light, disrupted moth mating cycles, and altered predator-prey dynamics, extending well beyond the lit area itself. Light spills. Light travels. A single sodium lamp casts measurable ecological effects for hundreds of meters. And it is getting worse, not better, because of a transition that was sold to the public as environmental progress. The global switch from sodium street lighting to LED lighting, accelerated through the 2010s, and continuing now, was justified on the grounds of energy efficiency. LEDs use less electricity per lumen. That part is true. What was not communicated, because it was not on the packaging, is that most municipal LED installations emit a blue-rich white spectrum, and the blue end of the spectrum is precisely the wavelength range that disrupts insect navigation most severely. The old orange sodium lamps, for all their inefficiency, were relatively narrow in spectral output and comparatively easy for many nocturnal insects to filter out. The new LEDs flood the night with the exact colors that break moth vision, and because they are cheaper to run, cities install more of them, brighter, in places that were previously dark. The net result, measured from satellite, is that the illuminated area of the Earth's surface has been expanding at roughly 2% per year, and the intensity of that illumination has been climbing faster. The efficiency gain went straight into more light, not less. It is a textbook case of the rebound effect, and moths are paying the bill. And now the ceiling itself is changing. Since 2019, the deployment of satellite mega-constellations, thousands of low-orbit reflective objects, has begun to measurably brighten the diffuse background of the night sky across the entire planet. Estimates published in monthly notices of the Royal Astronomical Society suggest the diffuse sky brightness has already risen by around 10% globally from this source alone, and the number of satellites in orbit is projected to increase by an order of magnitude within the decade. There will soon be no truly dark sky left anywhere on the Earth's surface. Not in the Atacama, not in the Australian outback, not in the middle of the Pacific. The sky moths evolved under raids as being replaced, everywhere, by a sky nobody has ever tested for ecological consequences. We are running the largest uncontrolled experiment in the history of terrestrial ecology, on an animal group we barely fund, with equipment that was sold to us as green. And here is the part that closes the loop. Go back to the 4 numbers we opened with. 160,000 moth species against 17,500 butterfly species. A third of British moths gone in 50 years. Put those figures next to everything you now know. The pollen loads, the yucca contracts, the Darwin prediction, the blue tit broods, the neonicotinoids, the 97% of meadow, the streetlights, the satellites, and the shape of the paradox finally resolves. We did not miss the collapse of a minor insect group. We missed the collapse of the majority pollinator on Earth. We missed it because it worked in the dark, and we do not fund what we cannot see at lunchtime. We missed it because we had built a story about pollination in which moths did not appear, and by the time the science caught up, a third of them were already gone. Half the pollination system of a temperate ecosystem was doing its job invisibly, and we spent 50 years dismantling the conditions it needed, and we called the dismantling progress. That is the invisibility paradox. Not that moths were hidden, that we were not looking, and the animals that pay the price for that failure of attention are still paying it, tonight, under every lamp that was installed without asking what it would do to the sky. The lights are not going off. That is the honest present-day beat. Nobody in any government on Earth is proposing to turn the lights off. The trajectory is more light, brighter light, whiter light, higher into orbit, further into the countryside, every year, forever, unless something changes. And that something will not be a technology. The technology to shield lamps, to warm their spectrum, to dim them after midnight, to leave dark corridors along hedgerows and rivers, all of it already exists, All of it is cheap, and almost none of it is required by law anywhere. The change, if it comes, will come from attention. From the public finally noticing the animals that were always there. From moths becoming, at long last, a group that people are willing to name, to defend, to write into policy documents alongside the bees. From the same cultural machinery that saved the whales and the pandas being pointed, for the first time, at a creature that most people have spent their entire lives being told to swat. Whether that shift happens in time is the open question this video cannot answer. The data can tell us what has been lost. It cannot tell us what we will decide to do next. That part is still being written, in ministries and city councils and back gardens, by people who now know what they did not know a few minutes ago. You are one of those people now. Do with that what you will.